Hello and welcome this week to Talking Flutes Revisited Pod, the pods where Claire and I look back over some of our favourite podcasts from previous years. The aim of this revisited type pods are to draw the attention of our back catalogue with an excerpt or two containing flute playing information, thoughts, views, and of course the obligatory laughter. This week it's my turn, and I'm looking back to a Talking Flutes Extra Pod number 117, recorded in September 2020 over Zoom, with the brilliant flute player, teacher, composer, arranger, author, champagne and wine connoisseur, plus not forgetting the most important part, that he's a seriously lovely guy. Ladies and gentlemen, here's an excerpt of my podcast Chatette with the fabulous flute player, Paul Edmund-Davies.
We have to acknowledge the history of the instrument and the people involved in the education of it. But as with everything, education also needs to evolve. And my feeling is that, there's certainly in the United Kingdom, there is great admiration and following for the French school of flute playing. And by that, I mean sort of Taffanel and Gobert through to Marcel Moyse and Jean-Pierre Rampal.
Yep.
And there is, their absolute respect. There's some amazing material there. But, all those people that I've mentioned are now deceased, and the world has continued to evolve. But if we're constantly looking backwards for inspiration as to how to do things, I think we're missing out on grasping the moment ourselves. And so I'm constantly looking for ways of expressing this. And in fact, that's really why the 28-day warm-up book came up in the first place, is because there were numerous things that I couldn't do on the instrument, and I couldn't work out why. It was as a result of writing those exercises that, as an example, the opening page of the Poulenc Flute Sonata, everyone's really comfortable going, yeah, that's lovely. What a lovely tune, Mr. Poulenc. Thank you very much for writing that for us. Towards the bottom of the page, you get and of course, no one's actually told us that your fourth and fifth fingers in both hands on the flute are effectively the property of Satan. And he sent those fingers to completely sabotage your flute playing. Now, we can do all sorts of exercises. I say to people, I ask people, how do you get independence in your fingers, in your hands? And they say, I practice Taffanel and Gobert, EJ1, the very first exercise book. But that isn't an exercise for the fingers. That's an exercise in playing notes evenly. The only way we're going to exercise the fingers, because the muscles in the hand that close are stronger than the muscles that open, we have to exercise the fingers in both directions. And the only way we're going to do that is with a gently repeating movement. You can do that in triplets or duplets, it doesn't matter. But we've got to go through that process to give the fingers the chance to develop the muscle strength. I learn so much from teaching. And, it's when I'm giving a class, I mean, I'm sort of, I can almost quote Liberace on this, where, when he used to come to London and play the Albert Hall, and it was completely sold out for 7 nights. And he'd get up at the end and say, "Oh, thank you, everyone. You're so kind to me. And when I come over here, you're so warm and you're so generous. And sometimes, I just wonder, how on earth can I take the money?" But I always do. So I go and give a class, and as soon as someone gets up and I can see, I suppose in a sense, because of my own frustrations with myself, I can see where they're perhaps putting too much tension or creating bottlenecks for themselves. Articulation, that's another thing. We use our language as the means of articulating into the flute, which is a great idea up to a point, because it actually doesn't serve the music we're playing unless that music tends to be quite violent. In the English language, we use the tongue in an incredibly violent way. And we also ricochet the tongue off the roof of the mouth. And that's not good for playing a slow melody in a Brahms symphony, for example. So we have to be versatile. We have to find ways to do it. There are all sorts of mysteries. The fact that I'm still doing it at the age that I am now is testament to the fact that it isn't easy, that it's all consuming, and there's always something new to discover and something to learn. And I feel incredibly grateful for that. And the idea of retiring is completely alien to me.
Do you know what I really like is you give the due regards and respect for the history of the flute. But like art hasn't stayed in the Renaissance, has it? Or hasn't stayed in Impressionism. It has moved on. And we have this, we can appreciate the various stages. It's the stage now where graffiti is and, a Banksy pops up somewhere and everybody's lauding it. And I like the fact that you say the flute should should be like this, should be evolving, because the nature of the player and the person coming into it is also evolving.
Yeah, well, it's sort of I think I've reached that stage of life now where I know that I can't please everyone, and I'm not bothered about that. But there are various things that have taken place, in my opinion, that have done a lot of damage to both music and to musicians. And there are two items that immediately spring to mind that if I ruled the world of music, perish the thought, I would have sent into outer space. The first is a metronome, and the second is a tuning machine.
Really?
Because of course, if you're trying to teach a young person to play in time, of course a metronome is very valid. But I think metronomes they're there to serve a particular purpose, but then we as human beings should develop the skill to be able to play in time. And in the same way, we should develop our hearing and our ears to be able to play in tune. There's no such thing as an in-tune flute. It's the player that has to be in tune, because what they've got in their hands, there are so many variables that they themselves have got to have the ability to be able to control those variables. It's not the instrument that's going to control them. The instrument is actually pretty basic, but it's up to the individual to actually to use their ears. So yes, I don't make myself very popular when I say I'd have tuning machines and metronomes banished to the outer kingdoms. I can't imagine Mozart, on top of his piano had a metronome. I don't think he was focusing on, now, shall I play in time today? He was actually focusing on, what shall I say today? And this is the other thing that I think we tend to get too embroiled in the things which are secondary rather than primary. And I think the other thing that as I'm getting older that interests me is that I want to try and provide, and this is where Simply Flute comes into it. I want to try and provide a platform for people to develop their skills on the instrument, but primarily through music rather than technique for the sake of technique. And I feel that so much that has gone on in the past has been focused purely on technique in what I consider to be a very, very uninteresting way, just by sort of repeating things ad nauseam, but they don't go anywhere. And surely, if we're involved in music, we need to actually be going on some kind of a journey, because the end result is we've got to stand up and take other people on a journey. And if we're not actually doing that within our practice, then there's something lacking, and there's something that we're not training for. And I always liken this, there's no such thing as an actor not acting. Even when they're off the stage, they're still acting. There's an element of that we've got to be involved in as well.
I remember in a flute course that we did a few years ago, one at one at Harrogate, Paul. And you were talking.
One of the very few you bothered to turn up for.
Oh, no, you're a hard worker. I remember you were talking to people about music, and you were saying that each piece that you play is a story, and you're unpicking in this beautiful way the fact that every note is a word, and that you to communicate to the audience in a way that isn't a technical exercise. To bring them into this narrative, each note has to be a word, and you are creating this story about a piece of music. And that goes back with what you're saying then.
Well, this kind of, there's going to be many different reasons why this kicked off. But I think the thing that interests me most about this is that many, many years ago, and there will be people listening who won't know the name, but the jazz pianist Oscar Peterson, he came over to London and he did some sort of half-hour, 40-minute shows for the BBC. And I happened to know the floor manager of the studio, and I got into all of these. And he would have a guest with him. He had Count Basie with him one day. So many years ago, I had the chance of meeting Count Basie. But at the end of each of these sessions where he'd been playing and interviewing one of the greats from jazz, there was questions from the audience, and someone said to him at the end, Mr. Peterson, you must have played My Funny Valentine thousands of times. So what goes through your mind when someone requests that you play My Funny Valentine yet again? And he said, it's terribly simple. I say to myself, okay, what can I do with this piece today that I've never done before?
Yes.
And I think that is such an important thing. Now, I doubt that we're going to have the opportunity here to get into particularly lengthy discussion about being nervous. But everyone gets nervous, and everyone has to find their way of dealing with it. But for me, before I go on to a concert, and play a concert, let's say the first piece is the Fauré Fantasy. Mm-hmm. And rather than thinking, oh my goodness, I'm nervous, I am actually saying to myself, okay, yes, I've played this many times, but what can I do with this piece today that I might even surprise myself? What route can I take that isn't isn't the way I've always done it? So that's exactly it. It might help people if they get nervous before they walk onto the stage, just to be focusing on that, because I've found that completely takes my mind off being nervous. And again, you can focus on what you're doing rather than worrying about what people are thinking. What I find very irritating is when I hear flute players talk about a piece, let's say the Fauré Fantasy. Oh, it's so boring, that piece. Well, no, you've made it boring, because actually it's phenomenally good music for our instruments, and we're not blessed with the kind of repertoire that string players and pianists get. So it's our job to actually make whatever music is in front of us. It's our job to bring it to life at that moment. And people say, who's your favorite composer? And I, well, the one I'm playing at the moment. It's that, you have to be completely engaged and involved at all times.
If you enjoyed that excerpt, you can listen to the full pod by visiting Talking Flutes on your usual podcast provider and scrolling down to podcast number 117, titled metronomes and tuning forks should be banished to outer space. What a title. Thank you again for joining us on Talking Flutes this week. Until next time, may your week ahead be musically fulfilling, and may your pianissimo third octave F sharp be beautifully resonant and in tune, because mine never is. Goodbye. Talking Flutes and Talking Flutes Extra are podcast productions by the Trevor James Flute Company. For more information, visit trevorjamesflutes.com.